you can all hear me very well. Thank you for joining our webinar today. As we've said, this is going to be a regular feature from Innovare. We are calling it our Innovare Adesa, which stands for conversation. Okay, so it is our virtual thought leadership series that we've established in one of our responses to the COVID-19 disruption of our environment. Okay, there are still people joining in, so we'll just slow down a bit. So I'll just give a couple of more minutes, and then we can let other people join. Okay. Today we're going to discuss about information assets. Okay, we're going to look at the different perspectives of information assets and its importance in the establishment of a worthwhile information security management system. Okay, so I expect that, will be about 45 minutes, 45 minutes, not too long. I don't want to spend too much of your time like I did last time. I must apologize again for those who were on last week, Thursday, in which I was the speaker. Okay, so we'll try and keep within the time, about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and then we'll leave about 15 minutes for questions and other discussions. Okay, well, let's kick off. Okay, so let me, I will adjust the video. Let me just, so that you can focus on the, So this is just a short profile of myself, okay? So let's kick off. Information assets, the definition. Let's start by defining what information assets are, okay? So these are, well, it seems difficult to find a standard definition of information assets. Okay, I've been looking around, there are so many. These two kind of jumped out at me. Okay, a body of information defined and managed as a single unit so it can be understood, shared, protected, and exploited efficiently. Okay, another source said that information for decision-making purposes by an entity. Okay, so those are some of the definitions that I have seen, and it seems focused on data, on information and data itself, okay? But let me give you a first perspective in that let's look at the relationship between information, data, and other associated things that we can call assets, okay? This is called the bullseye model, okay, for information security. And it gives us a perspective of how data, which, yes, is the main focus, is surrounded by various different type of assets, which are critical, which the data sits on in that sense, and which are important to its successful usage, exploitation, and protection. Okay, so I would like to come up with this definition and say that an information asset is anything to do with data processing. Okay, in actual fact, this is the direction too that ISACA comes from, that, you know, it covers everything, anything to do with data processing. Okay, anything that we need as a minimum requirement to do data processing, we need to consider it as an information asset. Okay, so just to look at the categories, okay, of those information assets. Okay, now this categorization is not standard. Okay, ISO 27001 does not prescribe any categorization. It's purely up to the organization when they are establishing and defining their data assets, information assets. Sorry. Okay, so this is a categorization that we at Innovare use, and there are a couple of things there that you may not find in other information assets categorization, and I'll explain why. Okay, why is this? So let's just pick them one by one and just let's look at certain perspectives about each category. Okay, now one of the reasons or the criteria in establishing the categories is management. Okay, your ability to manage those assets, and the idea is that let's manage like assets together. Okay, to organize them together, because these are assets that have some level of similarity. Okay, they are maybe from a risk exposure perspective, from a utilization perspective, so different perspectives. So we will just talk about them. So the first thing is data, obviously. Okay, as I said, most people, you know, I mean, when talking about information assets, then we kind of focus on data alone. But as I said, the whole spectrum. But still, yes, the information data is critical, and we need to be able to understand all the data sets, all the data entities that are used within the organization. Okay, for various reasons, you know, from a risk perspective, also for a data protection perspective. These days, from a data protection perspective, you need to ensure that you actually need that data. Okay, if you don't need it, don't take it, don't gather it. Okay, so those are some of the reasons why, you know, organizing, getting all the data that your organization has typically is very important. Okay, then software. So your applications, your operating systems, your utilities. Okay, all these come under the software category. Okay. Then in the hardware category, okay, we define hardware within this categorization as anything, as the hardware that interfaces, that the users interface with. Okay, so all the things that the users use, we categorize as hardware. So laptops, desktops, projectors, printers, you know, all those things that that the users use. Okay, because we're trying to differentiate between infrastructure. Okay, so infrastructure would be all the assets that are opaque to the users. So basically, infrastructure would be the servers, the racks, the routers, switches, you know, all the assets that enables IT to deliver IT services to the users. Okay, so that's the main difference from hardware and infrastructure. So the hardware are the things that the users use, and infrastructure are the things that the IT department, the IT shop manage in delivering IT services to the users. Then we have documents. Okay, again, we need to differentiate documents from data. Okay, so data, we are seeing them as the business data, data that is being processed, that is, into information that the business uses in the furtherance of the organizational objectives. Okay, documents are any document around the system. So we are talking about system documentation in general, network diagrams, policies, procedures would fall under documents. Manuals are very, very key. Change management documentation, all those documents that assist management of the information systems, we will put under documents. Okay. Then people. People are perhaps one of the most dangerous. Okay, I keep saying that if we didn't have people, we won't have a problem. Okay, it's people that bring the problem. Okay, and that emphasizes the perspective of information security. Okay, information security is not a technology problem. Okay, it is a social problem. It's a people problem. Okay, so we need to be able to understand so in looking at the people, we're actually looking at the roles, okay? The roles that are needed to manage and process data, okay? So we're looking at users, system administrators, network administrators, database administrators, IT manager, all the roles, okay? All the roles needed to be able to deliver on information security management. Okay, so that's where the people come in. Okay, then processes. Okay, so processes is something that you might not find in a typical information asset grouping. Okay, but in my mind, processes are very, very important. Okay, one of the perspectives that I have is that if anything has an owner, then it's an asset. Okay, then we need to look at it. Okay, processes definitely have owners. Okay, something that we look at. Okay, identify process owners to enable us understand what the process does. Okay, processes are also the representation, the underlying requirement of any application. Okay, an application automates a process, basically. So it's very, very important to understand your process. It's very, very important to identify your processes. So any process that has been automated is should be very much in focus of your information security development efforts. Okay. Then we have services. Services being delivered to us from our outsourced partners, suppliers, service providers in general. Okay, so anything that's given to us by an external vendor, supplier, and it has become very important. In fact, it is nearly impossible for any organization to successfully operate without having, without procuring a service of some sort. Okay, there are so many services, your cloud services, your internet, the various iterations of the cloud service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. All these services are very critical. Okay, so even from a control perspective, it has become a very, very important aspect of information security control. And it is represented from supplier relationships. It was a domain added in the recent ISO 27001 edition. It wasn't previously there. So we can see how right now it is a very, very important aspect of IT operation. And the last one is facilities, the buildings, the rooms in which we use, in which we do all the various activities in. Okay. So this represents the categorization of the various information assets that we would seek to protect, okay? And this categorization, as I said, is guided by grouping similar things together, similar things that you want to manage, they have some similarity. I need to reiterate that the categorization is up to the organization. There's no prescription anywhere, okay? So it's purely up to how the organization wants to be able to manage or wants to be able to categorize it, okay? If you're being audited for certification, you only have to justify why you have categorized your assets in that manner. That's all. Okay. So we need to gather some details around each asset. Okay. The specific identification of the asset. Okay. So something unique. Okay. We need to understand the value of the asset to the organization. Okay. Very, very important. And it rears its head in so many ways, from the criticality and from the next point. Okay. The loss implications give us some indication of the value. Okay, the value is definitely not the purchase value. Okay, I mean, the value is how important that asset is to the organization, and how how critical it is to ensure that the organization's objectives are met. Okay, then the loss implications and then the recovery priority. Okay, so assets are obviously, the things that we look at during disaster recovery or business continuity. So we need to understand what is the priority in which that asset has to be recovered. Okay. Then the location of the asset, very important. Who has it? Okay. Where is it? Okay. We need to know. We need to understand that. Okay. The security and the risk classification. Okay. Classification is very critical because it enables us to understand the efforts required in protecting that asset. Okay, so we need to be able to classify it according to a security or a risk rating. Okay, then the asset group. So the asset group is what we looked at. Okay, how we group the asset. And as I said, it is purely up to the organization to decide how those assets should be grouped. Okay, and then the owner and designated custodian. Okay, I'll spend some time on ownership in getting to the end of my presentation this afternoon. Okay, because ownership is very, very critical. Okay, so how do we organize the inventory? Okay, there are two basic approaches: a spreadsheet. Okay, using Excel, basically. Then, it's easy to implement, obviously, okay, because it's there. Okay, we all have some spreadsheet of some kind. Okay, depending on what details. Okay, I must confess that in some of my some of the early days, some of the templates that you see, has a long list of columns of different things that, you need to gather around the assets. To be honest, I would say that keep it simple as possible. Okay. The most important thing is that you are managing it. Okay. It's something that is something that I've come to realize and appreciate, that the information, the details, specific details that you gather, has to be at a very manageable rate. However, there's quite a lot of things as well. So if you're using a spreadsheet and you are a relatively large organization, then you might have to compromise some details to enable you have a manageable spreadsheet. And that might not give you the benefits that we expect from your asset inventory and management of that asset. Okay, so the spreadsheet might be ideal for smaller organizations, but for larger enterprises, then the details and the management requirements can make the spreadsheet redundant and not used, and that can, well, lower your level of risk mitigation. Okay, some of the management requirements would be that, you know, if an asset is moved, then it needs to be updated within the asset inventory. Okay, so like somebody has a laptop and it has changed, or the laptop gets damaged, the user is given a new laptop. Okay, it has to be reflected in the inventory. So typically, using an application might be the best. Okay, but it has cost implications, and some of these applications, inventory management applications, can be expensive. Okay, but the key thing that is very necessary is the ability to drill down on certain details. Okay, so within the application, for instance, we can pick the asset, drill down to what are the vulnerabilities, drill down to what are the threats, drill down to what are the treatment actions that we have decided upon, drill down to what is the status of implementation of any mitigation measures. Okay, so it makes the management and the risk control of the asset easier and more effective. Okay, and obviously it enables easy asset management. Okay, as managing an inventory can be very, very tricky. Okay, so well, tricky in the sense that it can be tiresome, arduous. So if it's going to be in a spreadsheet that you have to search and stuff, the final analysis is that you might stop doing it, and then the whole value of having the inventory might be lost. Okay, so having an application is perhaps the best approach. Okay, so how do we identify critical assets? Okay, what is the approach? Perhaps one of the best methodologies that we need, and yes, the business impact analysis is typically associated with business continuity and disaster recovery. But in actual fact, in planning your information security management system, you need a BIA. So a business impact analysis is very much, to me, a minimum methodology in trying to be able to define the various things that you need, establish the various structures, components, and processes that you need to be able to effectively establish your information security management system. Okay, so we can drill down to number 8. Okay, identify all dependencies and relevant to critical activities. Okay, so primarily your business impact analysis methodology enables you to identify your key processes, okay, your key activities within the organization. Okay, so from the flow diagram, looking at 8, within 8, what 8 does, it looks at what are the assets within the critical processes and the activities. What are the dependencies? What are the, what does those processes and activities depend on? Those will be your assets. Okay, so the business impact analysis through that step enables us to be able to identify our critical assets and understand, what are the important actions that we need to take in protecting those critical assets. One perspective of risk mitigation is that you can't do everything. Okay, we are looking at the important key activities. Okay, so even though even though the inventory must be holistic, okay, we need to get as much as possible 100% of the information assets that we have. The focus would be on critical assets on it. Okay. So just to reiterate on the asset register, okay, and again, just to differentiate between the fixed asset register and the information asset register, they are not the same, because I've had that question asked me in some of our work that we've done. Okay, the purpose of both is different. Okay, the fixed asset register, which contains all the assets within the organization, and yes, some, not all of the information assets. Okay, because as I said, I've explained the perspective of the information asset register. Okay, the fixed asset register looks at the values. So if I'm not mistaken, typically the values are depreciated, and IT assets are depreciated within 5 years or so. So, well, it also depends on, I'm not a financial person, so I think the finance people can correct themselves, But after a period, and when the asset is depreciated and zero, it is taken off the fixed asset register. But from the information asset register perspective, it is there until the asset is decommissioned. Okay, we don't look at values. We look at its operational capability. Okay, and mind you, if an asset is no longer working or no longer serviceable, is no longer operational, okay, it could have been decommissioned. Okay, decommissioned means that it is no longer used. But if it's still on the premises, then it has to be in the asset register. Okay, it has to be in the asset register, because it could be a way in which your data can be exposed. Okay, so if you have a decommissioned asset like a laptop, the hard disk is still in it. Okay, you've lost by it not being on the asset register. It might indicate that you've lost sight of it. Okay, there might be data residing on that decommissioned laptop. Okay, then we might not know where it is. Okay, so proper decommissioning of assets is very important. Okay, I've also seen organizations, okay, they will take out the hard disk and put it in a cupboard, lock it somewhere. Okay, but the risk here is that you are piling up a lot of hard disks, which you might not be able to utilize. Okay, then it might reach a point that you might not be able to manage it. And then that is where the security of those hard disks can be compromised, because you don't have a proper view of it. Okay, so when you're decommissioning, properly decommission, get the asset out of your organization. And proper decommissioning means that you erase the data. Okay, preferably we would want to physically shred the hard disk, okay, as much as possible, completely destroy it. Okay, then we are fine. Okay, so just to finish this point, provide the asset identity, allocate ownership. Ownership is so critical, but we will come back to it very, very soon. Assign the CIA of the asset, okay, and as you say, as you see above there, attach records for service, okay, for the BCP, as well as the business impact analysis, okay. Then we arrive at the criticality of the assets. So as I said, it's the critical assets that we want to focus on, which leads us to the RARTP, which stands for Rapid Assessment and Recovery of Troubled Projects, or in this case, troubled assets. Okay, what is the recovery priority? Okay, so we need to be able to recover assets in a certain order, which will benefit the organization and which would enable us to keep our recovery time objective within perspective. Okay. So just to reiterate the value of information asset management. So that is another, the emphasizing that perspective of the information value asset management. Okay. From the incident response perspective, it enables us to be timely, effective in incident response. Okay, incident response is the effectiveness of your incident response procedure is an indicator of how well your overall incident information security management system is working. Okay, so the ability to be able to locate the assets, know where the assets is, know its criticality, the response time required in dealing with that asset is very, very important. Okay. It enables asset control, okay? The ability to report on the status of the asset and to be able to manage the status of the asset, okay? It enables good asset acquisition practices. Okay, you will be surprised of how some organizations go and buy assets that they already have, okay, or buy assets that really they don't need, okay, because maybe the asset management is not the best. Okay, I have had an experience in some organizations that laptops that have been acquired, none could be found. Okay, we went in to compile the asset inventory, where one of the ways to identify what to look out for is to go to procurement and get a list of assets that have been procured recently and then find them. We didn't find any. Okay, security posture. Okay, so the state of your assets would enable you to be able to identify and gauge your security posture. Okay, whether perhaps your assets are end of life, getting near to end of life, or even actually obsolete. Okay, because remember, the fact that an asset is obsolete does not mean that it's not going to work. It will work, but the risks in that asset has increased because the vendor is not supporting it, and that's what obsolete means. The vendor is not supporting it, so you are not getting patches and updates to be able to manage that asset. Okay. It enables risk management, so which we've discussed. Audits and accountability, okay? So we purchase licenses, for instance, okay? We also have software that you might not have licenses. That is an exposure to litigation or reputational damage, okay? So these are some of the values, the importance of having a solid information asset management. Okay, let's look at another perspective of assets. Okay, so understanding what assets you have, gathering your assets is the first step in risk assessment. Okay, we need to know what assets we have. So from NIST It's interesting from NIST. NIST calls it system characterization. Okay, so you're identifying from the identified systems, from the scope of the your information security management system that you're setting up. What are the assets in it? Then, from there, we need to identify it before we start our risk assessment perspective. Okay, so asset-based risk identification is perhaps the most used, perhaps the most established. It could be seen as the easiest approach in risk identification within technology. Okay, but there's a problem with it. I just thought I'll add that, just for us to understand. Yes, asset-based risk identification is very important and it's a must. You have to do it, but it leaves out, because of the nature of the asset base, it leaves out governance and management. Okay, governance and management is not captured when you're doing an asset-based risk identification. Okay. Also, if you do not classify your processes as an information asset, you might also lose that. Okay, your policies, your procedures, and your processes might also not be captured. Okay, so those are one of the reasons why, from Innovare's perspective, the processes are very, very key in the assets that we gather and we examine. Okay, so the scenario-based helps a lot, because the scenario-based gives us a chance to include the other areas that might be missed from the asset-based approach. Okay, so it is not either or. It's not that you either do your assets-based or your scenario-based. In my personal opinion, you do both. Okay, yes, there's some level of overlap, because within the scenario-based, yes, you will have certain asset-based perspectives. Okay, but anything that you can do which would enhance and cross-reference the risks that you come out with is good. Okay, so it is very important to do both. Okay, so from an asset-based risk assessment, you identify the vulnerabilities, you identify the threats, you look at the existing controls, and then all the rest of the risks assessment process kicks in. Okay, then you end up with your risk treatment plan. Okay, so from all these things, so as I said, in going back to the asset inventory, we are able to have all this information within the application. If once we're using the application and not the spreadsheet, we are all able to have all this information, and we are able to monitor all this information to effectively manage the risk mitigation of the assets. Okay, it makes it very, very important. Okay, another perspective, ownership. Ownership is perhaps one of the best, strongest determinants of the security levels or the protective levels that you can establish. Okay, we want everything to have an owner. Once we have an owner, it means that the asset will be cared for. An asset that doesn't have an owner falls into disrepair. Okay, and that is true of any different perspectives that we can establish. Okay, whether it's even our family. Okay, when we lose our parents. Okay, our families at the family meeting would appoint somebody within the family to be responsible for the children that have lost their parents. Okay, so ownership is about having responsibility of an asset. Okay, and we identify the owner as the person who is close to the asset, understands the operation of the asset, understands the usage of the asset, understands what the asset is, how the asset is important in the processes that it's used, etc., etc. And that person invariably which we will arrive at, is the head of a business unit. Okay, so everything kind of falls within a business unit. Okay, so whether it's data, whether it's hardware, so every business unit's data should be owned by the head of that business unit. The processes that are within that business unit is owned by the head of that business unit. Okay, laptops, hardware are owned by IT, but the data, the software might not be owned by IT. Okay, it is owned by a business unit. Okay, invariably, the owner of the asset owns the risk. If you own the asset, you own everything that comes with it. So risk comes with the ownership of the asset. So you own the asset, you own the risk. Okay. Once you own the risk, then you own the control. Okay. So this is a very simple perspective of ownership. Okay. But in actual fact, it is not that simple. Okay. So let's break it down a little bit more. Okay. Some of the problems around asset ownership is the fact that it can be difficult for the business to own. Okay, invariably, everywhere you go, you ask who owns data, then they point to IT. IT owns data. No, if it's your data, then it is owned by head of HR, head of marketing, head of finance. Okay. But unfortunately, that is something that is a bit difficult to drive down. And it is one of the difficult aspects, the mindset change, the cultural change that establishing a formalized information security management system confronts. Okay. So it is something that is very, very important. Okay, because the reasons being that the person who is close to it, who understands it. Remember that we need to be able to classify that asset. So it's only the person who is close to it, who understands its usage, who knows what what is important about it, can be held can exercise that responsibility. Okay, so this ownership issue cannot be compromised. Okay, so if the business needs to own something, they need to be made to own it. Now, maturity and structure can expand the ownership within a department. Okay, so at the start, yes, we can say that the head of the department owns everything. But gradually, as maturity, as structure is established, we can move some of the ownership of some of the assets down. Okay. So for example, the IT manager, yes, he owns everything. Okay. But gradually, we can say that the database administrator, you own the database. The data center, the data manager who reports to the IT manager, okay, have more ownership. System administrators, you own the service. Okay. So maturity and structure can, effectively delegate some of the ownership levels, because those are the role, the people that use the asset in some manner or form. Okay. Now it's important that this delegation of ownership is enshrined in the roles and responsibility of that role. And that is why, roles and responsibility, job description is so important in the establishment of the ISMS. These must be clearly defined. The person who, who owns that component must be told. Okay, you must know, and it must be, and it must be clearly understood. Okay, that yes, you are responsible for this asset. Okay. The consultative relationship is important. Okay, consultative between the asset owner and information security. We will talk a little bit more about it. Risk ownership. Again, as I said, asset owner is risk owner. Again, it can be difficult in getting the business to accept that. Okay, but well, get them to accept ownership of the asset first, and then slip in their risk ownership, as I would say. But let's have the first step by letting them own the asset. Okay. But there's something a little bit different as maturity sets in. Okay. Information security doesn't necessarily support the delegation as in the asset ownership of the risk ownership. Okay, so as I said earlier, IT manager owns everything. Then gradually, things are being delegated. Other people are being responsible for areas. The DBA is responsible for the database, but the risks will still be owned by the IT manager. Okay, simply because we need authority sometimes to be able to deal with the risks of that asset. Okay, and if the person doesn't have sufficient authority, then it might be difficult to properly deal with all the actions required in mitigating the risks around the asset. Okay, so we can push down, delegate the asset ownership, but the risk ownership must be careful. Okay, it must be placed well. It must be placed with somebody who can effectively use the authority to get perhaps budget. Budget is always a big issue in organizations. Okay, so you need that maybe the person who manages the budget. Okay, so that things can and will be done. Okay. Again, the last point is consultative relationship is key. Again, I will explain that. Okay. Then the last one is the control ownership. Okay. So I began by saying you own the risk, you own the asset, you own the risk. Then obviously you own the control. Okay. Yes, but the users of the asset also own the control in that sense. And in talking about control ownership, I'm talking about the fact that we need to ensure that the control measures around the asset is properly applied. Okay, so basically, we need to be able to tell you as the user that if you're going to use that asset, then follow the standards of acceptable use. Ensure that due care. Ensure that you are complying with specific controls that the owner has outlined. Okay, maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the asset, and report unauthorized activity. Okay, all these should be enshrined in your policies. Okay, because once the user is using the asset, then we expect them to understand the controls that is required. So at that point in time, they own the controls. Okay, they need to ensure that they take responsibility of using the asset in the right way, okay, or following the standards of acceptable use. Okay. And as I said, those are things that should be within policies, okay, which would manage the users in using the assets. Okay, so it is important that the owner, would, in quotes, impart all these things to the user of that asset through the policies. Okay, and then the user is expected. So I mean, it brings back memories when, as a child, maybe you're playing football and then you break a glass and then you all run away. Everybody's lost. That is lack of control ownership. Okay, because that is lack of due care. Okay, and that is addressed by accountability. Accountability is the ability for the information system to be able to associate a user with an action. Okay, we need to be able to ensure that every action that happens within a information system was done by an uniquely identifiable entity. Okay, very, very critical. So that fact, that accountability nature, is what enables us to ensure that users, are tied to their actions. So that, but yes, there are other things that ensures compliance of the policies in the use of the assets, but accountability is very key. Once the person knows that, hey, anything that I do is going to be captured and identified, then we will expect due care to occur. Okay, and there it is again. Consultative relationship is key to make it work. Okay, so the point I'm trying to drive at from the consultative relationship is that information security are effectively consultants to the organization. Okay, we can see that from an asset management, assets ownership perspective, it is the business that owns the assets. We need to involve the business in the risks. Okay, make them understand that in some cases they own the risks. Okay, we also need to understand that they are involved in the implementation and the proper use of the controls. Okay, so it is not a regimented, forcing environment that we need to create from an information security management perspective. But we need to be able to consult properly and make the owners, the business, understand how they can effectively exercise their various responsibilities that they have. Okay, so for example, in trying to classify the assets, when you're going to classify an asset, trying to identify its risk sensitivity, trying to understand who should have access, trying to understand, what levels to apply to it. You need to talk to the owner. You need to identify the owner. Okay, and the owner of the asset, as I said, is the person who is close and who uses the asset. Okay, so that is the consultative nature that must continually be running. Okay, and that's the only way that we can have the asset ownership effectively come into force, the risk ownership effectively come into force, and the control ownership come into force. Okay, so I've gone over my expected time. So the final perspective, I hope we have, information assets sometimes is downplayed, okay? But it forms a very, very important aspect in building up a adequately leveled information security management system. And it's very, very critical, from all these perspectives that I have spoken about. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to me. If there are any questions, can we have the questions in the chat so that we can look at? Okay, I have a few. Can the ownership delegation affect the success of an ISMS project? Okay. Now, when we are in project phase, okay, in a very first time that it is being implemented, okay, we expect some of these gaps to be there. Okay, one of the things about implementing ISMS or an information security management system, that it's a maturity journey. Okay, we don't expect everything to be right the first time that you go through. Okay, when you certify for the first time, you would be, the auditor would be lenient. Okay, the things get tough when we start having when we start going through our surveillance audits. Okay, because the auditor would expect some improvements, some maturity to be coming up. Okay, so at the beginning, some of these things might not be properly evident. Okay, but we expect that as the years go by, as sufficient understanding keeps on occurring, then these ownership responsibilities would be achieved. Okay, it is not possible to have everything at the first go. Okay, challenge. Okay, and then does the RASI model clearly shows ownership? Yes, it does. So the RASI model enables us to fully understand the various responsibilities from various perspectives that we have in it. Okay. Any other questions? Are there any other questions yeah? Okay. How can we help the business process owners to appreciate that they are the owners of the assets, especially in these times of disruption? Charlie, we should have established that understanding before the disruption. Whilst we are in the disruption, I think the main focus is how do we contain and ensure that the disruption does not impact business as much as possible, and we are able to recover. Okay. But in trying to get business owners to appreciate their ownership, that is one of the consultative aspects of information security that needs to happen. Okay, we need to explain to them that this is their asset. They use it. They know it. Okay, they know what the requirements are for its protection. Okay, so invariably in putting it down, and this must be documented, and it is one of the important aspects of the documentation. You'll be surprised that once something is documented, then and then they have to sign for it. Then people they kind of realize the burden that has been put on, burden quotes, that, hey, this is my responsibility. If anything happens to it, you are responsible. We might outline certain corrective actions or disciplinary action that might occur, okay, then, hey, you will be surprised that they would actually begin to understand that they own the asset. But it's important to be able to break down the responsibilities of ownership, okay, because it's not really that arduous, but because it's new and it's a mindset thing, it's a cultural thing. So, you know, that is the nature of the resistance. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Document reviews are very few and far between. How do we enforce this? Well, this is enshrined also in frameworks. Okay. If you don't review your documents, you would not survive a surveillance audit. Okay. Remember that in going through an audit, we are actually auditing per the document, your policies, which you have developed. Okay. So if it's not representative of what's on the ground, then you are slowly getting yourself into trouble. Okay. So the main impetus, the main drive to ensure that document reviews are done is the fact that the auditor is coming. Okay. So in your set of documents, as long as the document is reflective as what is on the ground, then you are safe. But per nature, the way things change, we know that risks are dynamic. The environment continue to change, okay? Definitely there will be some changes in the environment, so you should be reflective in your document. So you can't tell the auditor that, oh, nothing changed, okay, obviously. So it's very important, okay? And is the fact that there's an audit coming, which would drive you to be able to ensure that those reviews and those changes are done. Because if you haven't, then you will fail the audit. Okay. Okay. So who in the RASI is the owner? Okay. So it's the responsible. Okay. I know that there's some level. I mean, from a lot of literature and things that I have read, there's this dichotomy between responsibility and accountability. Okay, and it's something that I have argued a lot with colleagues about it. Okay, but yes, it is clear in your RASI chart who the owner of what you are RASI charting is. Okay, at what stage do you review documents? Anytime, any stage. As soon as the change arrives, update it. As soon as there's a change, update it. Okay, so there's no particular point in which review of documents are done. Okay, so we say that a significant change or 12 months. So if there's been no significant change, then if 12 months has elapsed, review the document. But if there's a change that has happened within the organization, then review the document and update it. Okay. Okay. In a typical IS audit engagement, how important audit of IT asset management as compared to information systems governance? IT asset management is a subset of information system governance. Okay, governance is basically the strategic and the management activities of the environment in which we are governing. Okay, one of the most important aspects is the assets. That, in fact, and that is the whole point that I'm trying to drive at, that the importance of the asset is so critical. Okay, so and without the asset management and without managing your assets, it'll be difficult for you to have an effective risk assessment or risk management. Without that, then what are you governing? Okay, governance is, effective governance is bedrock is the risk management, which enables you to make the right decisions. Okay, risk management. The benefit of risk management is towards making decisions for the organization that would benefit and that would add value. Okay, so it is critically important. Okay, audits of the IT asset management to ensure that it is being well managed is critically important. Now, it would be difficult for me from an audit perspective just to pick out one, areas. Everything from an audit perspective, that you would have an audit plan over a period of time. Okay, maybe 12 months, 15 months. Yes, there are some areas that are more important, which we would be auditing more often. Okay, access control is one of them. Okay, your IT asset management also, would be relatively often, maybe not as frequent as access control. Okay, so I wouldn't want to just say that yes, everything is important, but it is the frequency, based on the risk exposure of that area of that domain, which would determine. Okay, what is the difference between an IT auditor and an ISMS auditor? Not much. At the end of the day, okay. Now, in my opinion, we are going to have auditors, period. Okay, in the very near future. Okay, at the moment we have financial auditor, we have IT auditor, but going forward we are going to have an auditor. He should be able to audit everything. Okay, so the IT auditor, ISMS auditor, to me they are one and all. Okay, the most important thing about auditing is the fact that what is your audit criteria? What are you auditing? Okay, so once we have the criteria there, we just need to perform the audit, and the audit report needs to go to the right quarters. Okay, so it doesn't really matter who does it. Okay, it's up to the quality of the audit being done. Okay, how do we ensure a consolidation of different asset owners and their assets within an organization? Example, different departments keep inventory of assets. We need to ensure that somebody owns the asset inventory. Okay, and I would expect that it's something that the information security unit would be doing that. Okay, because the asset inventory is very critical to the establishment of the whole information security management system. Okay, and that is one of the points that I've tried to establish through this presentation. Okay, so it will not be advantageous to have different asset registers or asset inventories from different departments. No, it will not be, and it will not be a very good idea. Okay, so it should be centralized, and the management of that inventory would be preferably be the information security unit. Now, ownership of anything depends on the organization. Okay, so it's not prescribed. Okay, we could have IT owning that information, and in some structures, yes, that is. It could be risk as well. Okay, but suffice to say that it should be there and it should be well managed. Okay, and the responsibility of the asset inventory should be clearly defined. That's all, in my opinion. Okay. Responsibility here will fall in the hands of the system owners, and accountability on us working for the asset owner and system owner to stand on safer ground, we know that there must be SLA, MOU, and other documentations. But how can we enhance this process so it shouldn't fall back on the SMEs in the situation of assets and end of life? Okay, let me, yes, to stand on safer ground, we know that must be SLA and other, yeah. Yes, well, you know, the whole ISMS process, yes, kind of supports all these different processes, you know, having the right documentation, okay, having the right agreements, having the right contracts, the SLA, if it's a service provider, okay, these are all very, very important documentations, okay. And seriously, as I said, ISMS insists on that. Okay, you know, so there's a whole domain on supplier relationships, okay? Contracts from operations management. It's all there, you know. So repeatedly, you know, the importance of such agreements between you, your suppliers, and your third parties, you know, third party risks, it's all very much emphasized and put together under the ISMS. Okay. Any other question? Okay. So let me round up by talking a little bit about the offerings that Innovare has. Yes, we do consulting within all the things that I've spoken about, which is subset from the ISO 27001 implementations. We also do 31,000, you know, risk, or we do audits and assessments. From a training perspective, we have a lot of training, certification training from various certification providers, ISACA, APMG, PCB, EC Council, you know. So we can provide you with the required training and the required information, the required certification that you need to be able to perform your various roles properly. Okay. I thought I had another question. How do you ensure? Yeah, okay, I've answered that. Okay. And for coming today, for logging on with us today, ladies and gentlemen, we are offering a free one-day online training on introduction to information security management with ISO 27001. Okay, so it's an introduction course. It's just one day. So if you're interested, please let us know by expressing your interest through the chat. We can get your details through your registration. So yes, so just express your interest. There are, I think our business development team has some qualification criteria, but I think if you express and they get in touch, they will make you understand how and who is qualified to enjoy the free training as an offer by the Innovare. Okay. Yes, Innovare is a authorized training organization for ISACA. So yes, we award CPEs. So anybody who wants, you will get 1 hour CPE for this seminar. Please indicate it. Okay, you can send us an email or indicate it in the chat, and we will provide you with the certificate, the CPE certificate. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you again for listening to me this afternoon, and I hope I've been able to give some perspectives for you to enhance whatever you're doing within your respective organizations. Okay, I think we will leave the meeting open so that people who want to express interest in the in our offer, please do so. Okay, so again, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you will join us again. We are having these webinars every Tuesday and Thursday, so the invitation would be sent out in due course. Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and have a very good afternoon.